My name is Naoko Shimazu, and I am professor at the Asia Research Institute. And before I'm going to introduce our roundtable panel this afternoon, I'd like to draw your attention to the Asia Research Institute's 20th anniversary this year. This roundtable is the second of the 8 specially commissioned in the ARI20 anniversary roundtable series, and culminating in the finale on the 11th of November on ARI and Asian futures in humanities and social sciences research, when we'll have ARI's research cluster leaders, and we'll also launch a specially commissioned video. Now, our moderator tonight is Professor Isaac Curlow. In 1995, he was invited to Singapore to start the first comprehensive professional school of art, film, and media in the country. That adventure, as he calls it, turned into 15 years of working and living in the country. After a few years as professor and the founding dean of the School of Art, Design, and Media at the Nanyang Technological University, Professor Curlow was invited to join the Earth Observatory of Singapore, one of the country's 5 research centers of excellence. As principal investigator at the observatory, Professor Curlow and his team of young Singaporean and Southeast Asian creators collaborated with scientists to develop interdisciplinary projects that help us to better understand natural hazards. Many of those projects took Professor Curlow to locations throughout Southeast Asia with a saturated presence of natural hazards. So tonight's roundtable is centered on one of those projects, a documentary feature film about the tsunami that struck the Indonesian city of Banda Aceh in 2004. So this afternoon, we have 3 experts joining the conversation about a topic intimately related to the tsunami, which is about the challenges of telling the story from the point of view of those who lived through the disaster and its aftermath. So Professor Curlow, I pass on to you.
Thank you so much, Naoko, for that nice introduction. And thank you, Ari, for inviting us to talk about the topic of representing disasters from the inside out, from the perspective of the locals who endured the disaster. This roundtable is centered around a film, The Tsunami of New Dreams. I want to thank ARI for their support during the last stages of editing the film. Also, my ARI colleagues at the Inter-Asia Engagements Cluster for providing really valuable feedback during the editing of the film. I also want to thank our participants tonight, Annabelle, Michelle, and Rizana, who were particularly helpful in providing feedback during the film. But most importantly, I would like to thank on everybody's behalf and my own, the Banda Aceh residents who allowed us to talk to them about their lives and allowed us to walk into their living rooms and discuss personal issues about the tsunami. This film is dedicated to them. Before we screen our first clip, I just want to mention a couple of ideas about the genesis and the purpose of the film. When we first went to Banda Aceh a few years ago, several years ago, I should say, I became very curious about the tsunami and the details of how the tsunami had happened and how it had impacted the community in such a terrible way. So of course I started looking for references and other works on the web. And to my surprise, I wasn't able to find a lot more than television news clips. And most of them were really about the physical destruction and the devastation. And they really didn't explain anything. They didn't offer any reflection on the event or its impact on the community. I also found a lot of clips that try to explain from a geosciences point of view the reasons behind the tsunami, how the the tectonic plates split, how the earthquake occurred, but there was nothing really for an outsider to understand how the tsunami had happened throughout the event and before and after. So I talked to people in Banda Aceh during our early visits about the tsunami, and I got the impression that a lot of them, when we were in groups, they really didn't want to talk about the tsunami. They just wanted to move on. But when I talked to individuals one-on-one, everybody was very willing to share details, and they were very eager to talk about what had happened and what they thought about towards the future. And so little by little, the idea of making a film, a community film about the tsunami, took shape. And that's really how this effort started. By having individuals from the community talk about the issues that were important to them. And then we recorded it, and a few years later, we had a film. I apologize if I am not making a lot of sense, but it's 3 in the morning for me here in Mexico City. So I will do my best. All right, so last idea, the main goal, therefore, behind this film is really about maximizing the impact that a film of this type can have on the future of the community, help the community process the event, become a centerpiece to talk about the event, discuss the event publicly. And I do want to thank ARI for providing support to translate the film into create subtitles in Indonesian, so that in the next few months, we will be releasing the film in Indonesia so that people there and in Aceh can watch it. Okay, so we will move on now to discussing the film, and I would like to introduce one of our presenters, Dr. Annabelle Tay Gallop. Annabelle is head of the Southeast Asia section at the British Library. She received her PhD from University of London, and her research focuses on the British Library's Malay collections, writing traditions, book cultures, and the art of the Quran in Southeast Asia and the Indian Ocean world. Annabelle has written many books. I am very familiar with her latest book called Malay Seals from the Islamic World of Southeast Asia, a very comprehensive catalog, a beautiful book. And I would like to ask Annabelle if you can please comment on the fact that, you know, this film tries to capture the local voice, the local experience, local issues, local perspective. So in a few minutes, would you be able to give us, in your opinion, if the film manages to do that and why?
Thank you, Isaac. I think for me, one of the most interesting and actually probably successful aspects of the film, as those of you who've just joined us for this, the first clip will perhaps have been startled to realize, is that there's no commentary, there's no authorial voice sort of telling you what is going on and what to think. The pictures and later on the interviews speak for themselves. And that's, I think, a really, really important, and this is what gives the film the ring of authenticity. Now, Isaac was really kind to mention my work and my publications, which are very much on the writing culture, the manuscript culture of Indonesia and the Malay world, and my new book, which is a catalogue of Malay seals, which was published actually by NUS Press in Singapore. But I should perhaps just pull out the fact that that book catalogues lists more than 2,000 seals, Islamic seals used in Southeast Asia over the past 500 years, and a full more than 500 of those seals, so about a fifth of the entire book, are from Aceh. And that just is, I mentioned that to give you a sense of what an incredibly rich history Aceh has as a region. And therefore, it feeds into the psyche of the people. And so the people you will be seeing interviewed in this film and who will be recounting their experience, they will be speaking from this perspective also of being Achenese, of being very, very confident of their own history and their own identity. And I think that is something that comes through alongside the trauma that they have experienced. They are speaking, with kind of centuries of dealing with a very, very important history, and also a long experience of remembered conflict and trauma as well. But Isaac asked me about the most interesting, well, some of the most memorable parts of the film. And I think to me in particular, because we all, particularly from the outside, the tsunami was not just an Indonesian, not just an Achenese event, but it had impact throughout the region. But what most people are very unaware of outside is the fact that the tsunami took place in the midst of an ongoing conflict, an armed conflict in Aceh, where the rebel group GAM, Gerakan Aceh Merdeka, had been fighting against government forces for many years, and the impact this had on people's lives. And I think that is captured, and that is one of the many voices that comes out in the film that perhaps will be most surprising and illuminating for other people who view the film. So that's, for me, one of the most memorable aspects of this film, Isaac.
Thank you, Annabelle. Yeah, I failed to mention that one of the key aspects of this moment in history is the fact that at the same time, during the tsunami period, there was a civil war going on in Aceh, and we will talk about later, but that is definitely one of the key components of this episode. Okay, I would like to introduce our next panelist, Dr. Michelle Miller. Michelle is Senior Research Fellow at ARI, at the Asia Research Institute at National University of Singapore. And her research focuses on intersections between the political geographies of environmental governance and urban change. Michelle has conducted ethnographic and archival research on emerging spaces and boundaries of environmental governance, social justice, conflict resolution, and urbanization in Indonesia. Michelle is also a prolific writer, and one of the many texts that she has authored is actually about the conflict, the civil war, which is referred to as the conflict in Aceh. So I would like to ask Michelle the same question. What makes for you this film memorable, and how does it capture the essence of the tsunami and the Aceh experience?
Thanks, Isaac. I just want to say congratulations on your New Hope Film Festival Award as well that you recently got. It's a beautiful film and so thoroughly deserved. And I know how many iterations, as do the other presenters, how many iterations went into making this particular film, and how, because we've seen so many versions before, and the final product is just beautiful. Like Annabelle, I really liked the way people spoke for themselves. There were no voiceovers, and I think that that was very important in conveying a sense of authenticity throughout the film, and in capturing, and also you captured a diversity of voices. So you had ordinary citizens, kids, adults, women, men, local leaders, village leaders, a civilian leader, Rusli, and Muharram, the GAM leader. The only people I thought were missing were the ulama and security forces personnel, but I understand there's probably reasons for that as well. But I felt that throughout the film, it nicely wove together the reciprocal relationship of Achenese people with the Indian Ocean as a giver and taker of life. And I like the way you've sustained this throughout the film, these human water connections in lots of ways, both subtle and direct. So there's the direct ways with the fishermen pulling in their boats, the traditional dance performance showing the continuation of Achenese culture by the water's edge at Lampauk Beach, the fish market and the interview material with Zura, the fish seller surrounded by her dried fish and octopus, and then the scenes of tourists and wet rice cultivation showing the renewal of life. And then there's also these subtle, poignant scenes. And the one that really grabbed me was in the room with Amir, the contractor, who was crying over the loss of his family with a conch shell hanging on the wall behind him. So there was that reminder in the background that the sea had taken away all that was dear to him. In terms of scenes that really caught my attention, I have to say the original footage is what really grabbed me, and there were 3 scenes in particular that stood out for me in the film. The first one, which I missed in the first screening because I was so overwhelmed by everything else, but at about 11 minutes in, there's a civilian guy carrying a machine gun running down the main street, and there's this grainy image, and nobody's even looking at him. They're just driving their cars and vehicles as fast as they can to get away from him. And it was just such an amazing image because it showed both the futility of weapons in that moment of crisis when they'd been everything before it, and also the absurdity of the moment, because in any other situation, people would be running away from that guy, and he would be the invoker of panic. And the second image, 47 minutes into the film, that I loved because it captured the resilience of youth was, and also the indefatigable spirit of Achenese people that you speak of in the epilogue, was where there's a group of people who are walking away from the camera, women carrying parcels of food on their heads, men carrying water containers, and then off to the left-hand side, there's this little girl who's also walking away into this landscape with nothing but ruin and debris and waste before her, skipping. And it was swinging her water bottle around as if she just doesn't have a care in the world, or as if she just needs to keep being exactly who she is, regardless of all that chaos around her. It was just startling, that little girl in that image. And then I think the third one that struck me because of the political moment was where the two BRIMOB, the Indonesian paramilitary police officers, were carrying a corpse through the water together with the Achenese civilians. And that kind of scenario would have probably been unthinkable just a day before because of the fear that the BRIMOB officers invoked because of their thuggery and brutality against the civilian population. And yet here we are, 24 hours ahead of what would have been a completely different scenario, everyone putting aside their differences and realizing that they need to work together in this moment of shock. And that also stood out for me in the interview with Rusli, the village head, who's when he said that his first thought, or the first thought of people around him, was to carry the corpses to the BRIMOB station rather than to a place within the community. And just one final thing, apart from the original footage, as with your other films, I really like your animation techniques. I've commented on it in Ichiro with the wave, and Haze, it's complicated. You've got a beautiful way of bringing an almost playful dimension into to bear on really dark and complex issues. And I felt that whole black and white pixelated debris moving through space, and then the sharp splintered wood and the vehicles crashing through houses and smashing homes, and it created this sense of the enormity of the situation, but also the fragility of humans in that event.
Thank you, Michelle, for such a vivid description of those moments, which, as you say, are key in telling the story. I would like to introduce our third panelist, Dr. Rizana Rosemary. Rizana is a researcher at ICAIOS, the International Center for Aceh and Indian Ocean Studies, and she's also a lecturer at the Department of Communication Studies at Shah Kuala University in Banda Aceh. Rizana specializes in issues of communicating health, climate change, and disaster risk reduction. Rizana is also assistant producer in the film. She came to many of our locations with her charming family. So she helped us get in touch with many of the people who were interviewed. So she has a very intimate knowledge of the production of the film. So Rizana, could you also, as a person who grew up in Banda Aceh, tell us how the film manages to capture this Achenese essence and the experience of the local people?
Firstly, I'd like to thank you, Ari, for the invitation and everyone for having me here. So I think the film really has managed to capture what had happened 17 years ago. I may say this not because I was partially involved in the film production, and I may not represent also the stories and experience of those people who are directly affected by the tragedy. Because for your information, I was not in Banda Aceh on that day. I was in Jakarta, but I've lost about more than 50 of my close families and relatives because of the tsunami. My father came from Malabo, which is West Aceh, where the epicenter of the earthquake strikes that time. And most of my family's members live there. So we just have to accept that they all become the victims of the tsunami. That's why probably because I'm not there, but I probably could represent myself as the voice for as an Indonesian and an Achenese. So this film for me really succeeded in helping people like me to reflect and to relate on what happened on that day. If I could recall, it was on Sunday morning. I had a phone call from my cousin who was on top of a tree. And then he comes yelling and telling that the Grand Mosque was on flood. We didn't have any idea what happened that time. and then afterwards there's no more connection. But then we saw on breaking news on one of the private channel television, the severe condition in Aceh. So I think the film really expressed the same feelings of what I feel that time, and also the people who are directly affected. My feeling was as similar as Pak Arif, one of the characters in the movie. He was also in Jakarta, and how he explained himself not knowing what had happened to his wife in Banda Aceh. So yeah, for me, it still reconnect when I watch that kind of movie. And the moment in the scene which really caught my mind was the second section, which is the wave, all about water. Because I lost contact with my parents and my parents-in-law almost 3 days after the tsunami. And even my brother, who tried to fly to Banda Aceh the next day to evacuate them or see what's. When I had a chance to come back a couple of months after the tragedy, and then listen to all the stories, and all the stories from the families are talking about how they're trying to survive or get out of the water. So the depiction of, like Michelle have already explained very details, the debris and everything that I said put on the section part of that film was very powerful. I mean, I could imagine how horrendous the water had and the impact is it on the people. Because when I hear the stories, I heard how my cousins have to lose her sister's hand in the waters, trying to get herself out the water, and at the same time she has to see the disappearance of her own sister. So it is such a heartbreaking scene, I think. So that's why, I don't know, even though I was not there, but every time I see this section of the wave, it really relates me, because everyone is talking about that water, that water that no one have seen before. So yeah, I congratulate Isaac for putting such amazing effort on the movie. I think it's a very well craft masterpiece, and I think the Achenese people should just watch it and be grateful of this kind of living documentation.
Thank you, Rizana, for sharing your story and for your kind words. And I agree. I mean, it is heartbreaking. That is the key word. To anybody who learns about the details of what happened, little by little, it's just overwhelming, and it is heartbreaking, because there were so many instances of people losing their loved ones in such unexpected ways. And that heartbreaking emotion is one of the emotions that we try to capture, and we hopefully transmit it to the viewer.
The water is like standing water coming to us. Like standing water coming to us. We're just lucky because the gate of the mayor house is filtering the trash from the sea, what the water brings. But in front of me, everybody is dying because of the gate. Very, what you call, like a knife. So everybody get killed there because they're standing on the gate. Yeah. So I can see that many people died there. We just hopeless at that time. We just praying. I just praying in my heart that God, this maybe my time. Hopeless. I cannot think, but everybody in my mind is just like very white, very quiet. I just praying in my heart. The water is very black, so I cannot think even that I cannot breathe or not. I can see that I'm very close with my husband. We climbed the tree, even that's very hard. I cannot climb. Then my husband trying to push me to get hike in the tree. Also my mother, we're trying to get my mother first, and then me. And then we are surviving in the trees after the water is getting down.
Thank you. As the panelists already mentioned, the movie makes extensive use of drawings and animated recreations, and of course, original footage that we managed to get from a variety of sources. And one of the things that we tried to do in this scene that you just saw, which is a portion of the scene, was not to explain what happened or not to try to piece everything in a linear, logical way. We just went along with the stream of consciousness that this remarkable lady was describing her experience, and with her own introduction of humor in the middle of such tragedy. So I would like if our panelists could comment about the use of animation, drawings, and those very stylized clips that we have here and there throughout the movie in order to communicate the emotion of the moment, the emotion that the speakers, the interviewees are experiencing. Would you like to comment, Annabelle, on this point?
Yes, I think one of the things that the film really brought out is, again, for those of us who were privileged and lucky enough not to ever live through a tsunami, is as you think of water, a tsunami is water. But of course, what the film brought out repeatedly over and over again, both in testimonies and through these animations, was the terrifying visceral, physical nature of that wave, that it wasn't just water, it was full of razor-sharp debris that came with an unimaginable force, or mud, as one of the interviewers said. It was mud churned up. You couldn't swim. It wasn't like swimming in water, it was swimming in mud. But that was really, that aspect was really brought out very, very forcefully through the animations. I felt, the continuous animation showing those, exactly as Michelle mentioned, the splintering of the wood, and one can just imagine how any human at all would fare faced with this barrage, this of weaponry coming at them. But of course, the most extraordinary thing, and this is also captured in the film, is that there are some who did survive. And Ibu, I think Ibu Neti, was caught between two cars and somehow surfaced, and we heard from her in the film. So that's perhaps almost, there were some unbelievable stories that came out of that, but linked with the the animations conveying that sense of the destructiveness of all the material that was caught up in the water. For me, some of the most extraordinary scenes were the original tsunami footage of the debris that was coming towards a bridge, but you had about 4 or 5 young men jumping agilely from pile to pile, trying to look for whether there are any bodies or anything but at the most extraordinary risk when one could feel at any stage, you know, any of those piles could turn over, be submerged, or hit into the bridge. So that was really, you know, my heart was in my mouth watching scenes like that, and that is what I think was greatly enhanced by the animations.
Thank you, Annabelle. One of the things that we try to avoid in using all these news footage was extensive or shocking images of destruction and death. We tried not to show it because it wasn't really necessary to show it. I think with sounds and with the editing, we tried to convey the sense of destruction. So I would like to ask Rizana, since we screened the film a few times locally in Banda Aceh, did you get any comments from your colleagues and your friends and family about the fact that you barely see the ugly side, the very ugly side of destruction? It's kind of hinted. Did anybody comment about that aspect of things?
Well, they actually didn't literally comment on that, because for those who experience directly the tragedy, they just could see it. I mean, it's within them. So sometimes, like yeah, my family said that all the bodies are in different shapes and conditions like that, and it's visualized also for us who was not in Banda Aceh. Like for me, like I said, I watched through the TV channel, and so it's just so surreal. I mean, that's why, you know, the sense and the feelings, the overwhelming feelings of that fear of helpless, not knowing what your loved ones condition in Banda Aceh, I think it's much more I mean, increasing, or I mean, it's more if you are not in Banda Aceh, because you don't take it for granted to see all the bodies inside. But like I agree with Annabelle, you know, like you mentioned, you don't have to show all the footage, and it is scary, but how you replace it to these animations, right? I think for me, it's really lively, because that's when I'm sorry, the back sound here in Aceh, we are is doing a azan. So what I'm trying to tell you that I'm consider myself an audio person, and I like to listen to people telling stories, right? So, and every time they tell the stories, I could visualize what they experience. And you managed to capture that, like in the moment of Ibu Neti. It's only an animation of a woman trying to struggle to get out the water, and then she narrates it, and that's what I hear from the others who survived. They said even a good swimmer could not swim in that condition, because all the debris and everything is just, I mean, it's beyond your control. And even I have a nephew. He was 7 years old at that time, and he was separated from his parents, and then he was found alive, survived on a rooftop of a house. And then he could only remember that there was a big cow. So it doesn't make sense. But you know, every voice or every people experience the different ways and how they deal with when they were trapped in those kind of water. And I mean, just putting those image like the real one footage and then the animation, I don't know, I personally see that as a strength for that, because you try to recall on what the other people say and try to see that on the animation that you made.
Thank you, Rizana. Next, I would like to play the third clip, which is a 5-minute sequence where people from Banda Aceh talk about how the conflict impacted their lives very briefly. And then we have one of the GAM commanders, regional commanders, talk about how, in his opinion, the tsunami contributed to the end of the conflict.
payah minta apa sebab kalau yang tajak kadang-kadang kat tepi dan balum harus tamai tapi-tapi. Memang agak payah. Kau tengok karena tu bedi tapi-tapi. Karena sweeping lah yang tajak kok kadang-kadang ugli-ugli hanya tajak ali. Orang tajak ugli nanti karena TNI, karena awak gam mainan. Dibandingkan awal mungkin karena awal mungkin lebih sulit karena komplik ini mungkin lebih mudah karena hanya li komplik jadi tidak ada kerja ho mentong nanya mangat hanya halangan li tapu.
Tapi sampai di Langsa sore itu pada hari Minggu itu kami tidak berani jalan lagi karena waktu itu sedang konflik dan sering terjadi perampasan dan sebagainya di daerah Perlak. Jadi oleh karena itu kita tidak berani malam jalan dan nginap di Langsa.
Ketika itu langsung putus total ya. Hubungan komunikasi via telepon, via HP itu putus total. Jaringan semua rusak. Jadi kita melakukan hubungan dengan HT. Halo Tenggo, HT itu radio punya Pak. Militer punya radio. Ketika itu saya juga tidak tahu tentang luasnya tsunami itu di mana sampai di mana. Ketika hari ketiga saya baru tahu kalau tsunami itu ternyata ada di Melabo, ada di Banda Aceh, ada di kawasan lain, ya, termasuk di Malaysia dan juga di Thailand sebagian ya. Jadi ketika itu kami menganggap yang bahwa lokasi kejadian itu di kawasan kami saja, ternyata luas. Setelah tsunami, mungkin kami agak tinggi bisa terselamatkan. Kemudian mereka di bawah, rata-rata mereka di bawah pantai, dekat pantai. Itu semua mereka di bawah air. Bahkan banyak sekali mereka yang meninggal dunia akibat tsunami. Ketika kami melakukan penyisiran, seperti di Kecamatan Pekanbadak dan juga di Kecamatan Loknga, selain daripada mayat-mayat itu dari masyarakat sipil, itu kebanyakan daripada militer. Kalau di sebelah sini banyak tentara, sebelah kecamatan ini. Kalau kecamatan Pekanbadak itu banyak brimob. Jadi rata-rata itu mayat mereka yang kita dapatkan. Kemudian senjata mereka. Antara senjata dan mayat itu sering tidak jauh. Itulah lebih kurang. Karena ketika itu pemimpin GAM meminta supaya adanya gencatan senjata untuk memberikan peluang kepada internasional untuk memberikan bantuan kepada masyarakat Aceh yang mengalami musibah tsunami. Ketika itu pemimpin GAM di luar negeri menyatakan gencatan senjata sepihak. Jadi kami menerima di lapangan karena kenapa? Karena keluarga kami korban daripada tsunami. Sebab ada perdamaian di Aceh ini semata-mata memang karena tsunami. Gempa dan tsunami. Itu yang penyebab awal. Sehingga terjadilah perdamaian di Aceh.
I would like Michelle, I would like to ask Michelle if you could please comment on the statement that the commander just made there in terms of the tsunami, the earthquake and the tsunami really being responsible for the end of the civil war. I have talked to a lot of people, as I'm sure you all have, and the opinions are split. Some people have said that that was just a coincidence. Others don't agree with that. So what is your opinion, since you have studied the conflict, the origins and the evolution of the conflict in such detail?
I think it's true, undisputable, that both sides changed tactics after the tsunami, and that their shared loss definitely of their friends, their family members, it definitely bolstered people's resolve to prevent further loss in the aftermath of the disaster. And so there was this deeply emotional response to the scale of the tragedy on both sides, because there was an advisor of the President Yudhoyono at the time, and he said the only time that he saw President Yudhoyono in a state of anguish was after his visit to Aceh after the tsunami. And yet it's easy to infer from Tengku Muharram, the GAM commander who's interviewed, his statement that the tsunami itself ended the conflict, which is of course not the case, because we've seen how other separatist conflicts in southern Thailand and in Sri Lanka continued, and they were affected very badly by the tsunami as well, and they failed to reach negotiated settlements. And in the context of the film in the epilogue itself states that the conflict didn't end until 8 months after the tsunami, through the signing of the Helsinki Peace Agreement. So there was a change in attitudes that allowed people to come together for the Helsinki talks, which extended between January and August, but the tsunami itself didn't end the conflict. And a couple of weeks after the tsunami, there was the military's surveillance of foreign aid workers testifies to that. So they started heavily policing the movements of foreign workers out of urban centres that were hard hit by the tsunami. And Halim, the worker who was interviewed in the film, alluded to this when he said civilians couldn't go to the mountains because soldiers on both sides were fighting there. And that's something that certainly continued after the tsunami. And Tengku Muharram also he said, when we went down and we saw the bodies of BRIMOB officers, and first we saw their bodies and then we saw their weapons, and they took their weapons. And in fact, when I went to Aceh after the tsunami, the motorbike that I rode was a former Indonesian security forces bike that was taken from the rubble. But the fighting did continue inland, and that was well removed from where the foreign aid workers were. And at the same time, there were 550,000 Achenese civilians who were displaced by the tsunami, and they often went back to natal homes in inland rural areas where the fighting was ongoing. And a lot of the international aid organizations that were in Aceh at the time weren't even aware there was a conflict, because they were their budgets and their energies were focused on urban centers. So I think that my view is that it was political will rather than the tsunami that contributed to the cessation of hostilities. And the shock of the tsunami created a circuit breaker that both GAM and the Indonesian government were able to use to their advantage to reassess their respective positions. And either of them could have elected to miss this opportunity, but they didn't. And the timing was great because they had a president who was open to resolving the Aceh conflict through a peace process, unlike the previous president, Megawati Soekarno-Putri, who preferred a military solution. The conditions were ripe. There was a vice president, Yusuf Kala, who had long been involved in peace talks involving the Free Aceh movement. So either side could have chosen to unilaterally withdraw from those talks, and they almost did on several occasions in Helsinki. But the fact that the tsunami added to their political will to stay the course and eventually arrive at a settlement in the form of the law on governing Aceh that was able to provide a firm foundation for peace.
All right, so I would like to play the next clip in just a second, but I would like to explain the purpose of this moment in the film. About the first half of the film, if you will, provides details about the before the wave and during the wave, and the conflict, of course. This scene basically introduces the second part of the film, which is after the wave, after the water started to move away and people started to try to figure out what they had to do and process the event. Well, I'll let you watch the film, but this is the film that announces the second half of the film.
Tidak cukup tenaga di sini, tidak cukup tenaga saya untuk bisa melaksanakan secepat mungkin, gitulah.
Allahu Akbar. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alamin. Ar-Rahmanir Rahim. Maliki Yawmiddin. Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in.
If you haven't watched the film, it's hard to understand what's going on here. But one of the things that in this sequence, one of the things that we tried to convey was the sense of despair, chaos, and pause, and then facing reality and using the spirituality of the faith, the religious faith, to try and heal and continue living. It's a lot of very complex feelings, very sometimes opposing forces in the middle of heartbreak. And I would like to ask our panelists if each one of them could please comment on their opinion about the role of faith in helping people heal.
It's a very, very profound question, Isaac, and of course I think faith has played a very important part for almost everyone in the film. And you know, we talked earlier about Ibu Neti's almost miraculous escape from the water, and she felt it was because God was looking after her. But you know, one thing about the role of faith and the future, I mean, we have heard quite a lot that compared to the fatalities in Aceh, that on the neighboring island of Simalui, which was closer to the epicenter of the earthquake, that the number of deaths was much lower than expected because there was an embedded historical memory of tsunamis, which meant that everyone, as soon as the earthquake had happened, people ran to the hills. And this didn't happen in Aceh, where we heard time and time again people saying there is no, you know, there's never been tsunamis in Aceh. And I was sort of pondering this and thinking, you know, what is, you know, how would faith and other things play a role in future prevention? And in terms of Aceh's history, the one real continuity throughout has been religious education, which is like part of everyday life for centuries. It's embedded in children. And I think it's actually through the faith and through the role of, you know, and Michelle mentioned that the one, interestingly enough, you know, one voice we didn't hear was from ulamas, but actually would be the embedding of lessons from the tsunami in as part of religious education in the daya, in the religious establishments, because you have school curriculums that come and go. You have, you know, you have the Tsunami Museum. We have films. You know, but none of us know how long these things will stay for the future. But religious education in Aceh is the one thing which has, for centuries, you've had you know, a continuous stream. So I think that role has a religious education. It's not quite, I'm not quite answering your question, Isaac, I'm going to another aspect of it, but has such an important role to play in learning lessons from the past for the future. Thank you.
Yes, I agree. And as Achenese and as a Muslim, I mean, I believe that the role of the religion has contributed in how people of Achenese overcome or cope with this kind of tragedy, because in our teaching of this religion, we also taught that if you died within the disasters, drowned in the water, you will be called, you'll be survive later on in the hereafter, and then you go to heaven. So that's a promise in our religion, and some of the people rely on that kind of teachings and principles. That's why then they become such a belief of the fatalistic, that this disaster is predetermined by God. So some of people think that this condition, they have to just accept it. At the same time, they have to move on. So it's quite a very tricky kind of dealing with this kind of situation. But actually, this perception is also quite dangerous, because then people, if they continue to hold on this fatalistic belief, then they will ignore and just undermine all the condition or the prevention for a future fatalistic. So yeah, that's what is happening actually at the moment when we're facing this pandemic, this COVID also. There's a pro-cons about how religion, Muslims have to really face and counter this pandemic. So it's quite the same, but but what I'm trying to say that sometimes religion could be the source and manifest for people to move on, but at the same time, they just an excuse for them just to accept because it's predetermined.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with both Annabelle and Rizana that there's no doubt that Islam is extremely important to people making sense of and healing from a tragedy. But I also agree with Rizana's point that it can be a little dangerous in some ways when Islam becomes used and I'm going to take it in a different direction from how Rizana used it, but in the direction of Noor the housewife, who lost her children and went to Medan, and she appears in the epilogue, and she reflects a view that was politically manipulated after the tsunami to advance a particular agenda that turned religion into morality as an end in itself, rather than morality for social welfare and justice. And Noor, for those of you who haven't seen the film, Noor the housewife says that it takes the view that the tsunami occurred because of the sins of the people, and unless people stop sinning, then a bigger disaster will come that will wreak even greater havoc. And I think that in every crisis, there's opportunity, including for particular illiberal interpretations of Sharia to take hold. And I think that one of the, while Islamic law has definitely had some benefits, there's been this kind of moral vigilantism attached to certain aspects of the implementation, like in the form of the Sharia police, for example, who earned a reputation for thuggery against civilians because of their emphasis on cracking down on morality for indecent encounters and gambling. And the people who bear the brunt of these kind of Islamic legal bylaws are the poor people and women, because they can't afford to pay the fines, and they're not shielded from the humiliation of public whippings, which is another thing that's taken root in the development of post-tsunami Sharia that wasn't there before. So I think definitely, I mean, religion to heal from disasters, but the political dimension, I think, can be dangerous when it's politically manipulated.
Thank you, Michelle, for your comments. So yes, it is a tricky issue, and that is one of the issues that we tried to resolve in the last 20 minutes of the film, the balance between how you go about all these issues that were mentioned by our three panelists. The last 5 minutes of the film, which is the last clip, it contains a statement by one of the interviewees about the fact that we knew that the tsunami, that an earthquake is a precursor to the tsunami. We could have saved ourselves. And with those words, we tried to wrap up the communal feeling about this catastrophe.
Chinese, actually, their character is very strong in dealing, especially with death. Chinese is very convinced that their death has been decided by God. The character of Chinese is historically, mostly warrior. Always with war, so they are easier to accept death. Especially for fishermen, like in my place, for example, they always have someone who passed away in the sea because of the wave. So to cope with that, I think it's easier for them. There is a word actually in the Quran. They say, "Kullu nafsin za'iqatul maut." Every soul will one day will meet the death. Any soul. إذا جاء أجلهم لا يستأخرون ساعة ولا يستقدمون. When your time is come, no one can delay. You cannot delay it. You can't make it faster. Any burial ceremony always followed by that kind of statement. Like every one of us, one day die, and you don't know the place, you don't know the time.
Punya informasi tentang tsunami, saya pikir kita selamat semua. Walaupun ini sudah kehendak Allah. Karena tsunami itu tidak datang serta-merta. Dimulai dengan adanya gempa yang demikian besar. Kita bisa terbebas dari tsunami karena tenggang waktu antara gempa pertama dengan tsunami itu cukup jarak, cukup memberikan kesempatan kepada kita untuk menyelamatkan diri.
Well, I want to thank all of you for participating in this roundtable. I want to thank our three panelists. Thank you, Rizana. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Annabelle. Thank you, Naoko. Thank you, the support staff who helped us run this Zoom meeting so smoothly. All right, so have a great day, and thank you so much.